Welcome to another episode of Hot Mess Espresso, guys. We have a women's coach that is a little more unique than some of the other coaches we've had on here. We have Susie Pettit. Hello.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you
I
for
am so
having me.
glad that we were able to make this happen. So I guess first question, how did you end up in Australia?
That's a loaded question.
We just dive right in here. It's
We
fine.
could dive right in. I guess can I back up a little? So
Absolutely.
I'm a life coach. I think of myself as a mental health coach
Mm-hmm.
for people. I help people stop feeling responsible for everyone and everything else in their life. And I do that because that is my background. I was raised in outside of Boston, Massachusetts in the United States, and was raised in a very well off family, but one that had no boundaries, very codependent. We had to just act a certain way to keep dad happy, to keep mom calm, to how we acted and how we showed up made our parents feel a certain way is the message I got as a kid, that I was somehow responsible for an adult human's emotional regulation and
Can
experience.
relate.
Yeah. And so I had a lot of that going on. And then in that household, there was some, as we do as kids, we have trauma, and I didn't heal from it. So I went right into a first marriage with no boundaries and codependent and very controlled situation, and had three lovely sons in that marriage. Yet it was it was a soul sucking experience. And it was really similar to what a lot of people have happen, is you just sort of go through life. You think this is the life you should be living. Like, I was following the rules. I was the oldest child, as we sort of touched on. And
Mm-hmm.
I was, I went to the college, I got the degree, I got the husband. I was even living in a house with a freaking dog, for God's sakes. And I was just feeling like, outside I looked like, oh, she's got it together. And inside I was just miserable. And every week would go to like a play group with my friends. And it was sort of just a rinse and repeat, almost like what I used to do in therapy. Like, I'd go in, I'd complain about something, and sort of like feel better temporarily. And then it's like, go out, rinse and repeat, do the same damn thing again. Like, and unfortunately, when I was in my early 30s, one of my best friends in that group is diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And she went through 3 years of basically dying. She ended up dying. And on her deathbed, she said to me, she said, Susie, don't die before you've lived. And what she was speaking to was how we were living our lives, that we were just these little like casements almost of like human beings walking around doing what we should be doing what we were told, and just and sort of that people pleaser. And what does he want me to do? What does she want me to do? Okay, I'm going to do that. And that really was a wake up call for me, which then fast forward went through a crazy divorce where, my family of origin did not like that, because as a woman, you're supposed to have a husband. And so they sided with my ex, and all sorts of fun stuff, which now we are exactly. So that
I'm
is,
sorry. I couldn't even try to keep a chill face on that. I'm just like, what the
yeah,
no.
yeah, because I was doing the wrong thing. I was not falling in line with patriarchy, and like, a woman stays with a man, and it doesn't matter if you're happy or not, like all of that. And so my family did not like that. And so anyhow, I went through this big, midlife crisis, but I call it an awakening, where I was like, what
Mm-hmm.
the heck kind of life am I living? And is this what I want to be living? And I had one session probably like right around then with a coach instead of a therapist. And I changed what I was actually studying to be a therapist. And I changed what I wanted to do based on, it was like a 1 30-minute session with the coach where she literally changed my life. Like, I don't need to get into the specifics, but I just was like, okay, this is what I want. I want a little less focus on the past and like, oh, let's just keep rinsing and repeating. I want like, okay, now what? Now what do I do? How do I go live this like empowered best life? So that's what got me into separating from my husband, basically bankrupt, living in the state of Virginia. At that point, you're the property of your husband. I had to stay in our unfinished basement for a year in order to keep custody of my kids, because it's going to sound like reality TV, but my dad was supporting my ex's lawyer. My dad's a very wealthy man. So I'd been a
What?
stay-at-home mom. Right. I had no money. So, and if I left without my kids, I would be accused of abandonment, and I would lose rights to see my children. And if I left with my kids, I would be accused of kidnapping, and I would be thrown in jail and lose rights to see my kids. So the solution was to stay in the unfinished basement for a year. Until then, I launched myself out into a crazy, and moved forward from there. So long story short, when I moved out, in my head, I was like, I am never getting married again. I'm done with this shit.
Oh my
Like,
God.
And so I went through a really like a self-development, soul journey and started meditating. I
Mhm.
was like, okay, I'm going to meditate. I want to be a calmer mom. Like, let's figure out what my role in all this has been. And in that process, I was using an app called Insight Timer. This does answer your question. And so I, at some point, left a review on one of the meditations. It was a sleep review. And I said, this is a good meditation. And
Mhm.
like about a week later, I looked back or I did that meditation again and I noticed someone had commented on my review. And now, meanwhile, I live in the state of Virginia, right outside of
Mhm.
Washington, D.C., like high security. And the person who commented on my review said Paul from Wollongong. And so in my head, I'm like, okay, dude from a made up town, like,
Literally, I'm over here like that's a thing.
and he said, like, if you like this, Susie, you'll like this meditation. And meanwhile, that's my husband now. So I'm now living I'm 20 minutes south of Wollongong, which is actually a town in Australia on the east coast of Australia. It's literally on the other side of the world. My husband went on to write a book called 9,756 Miles to Happiness, because we studied like we are the absolute opposite pinpoints of the world.
I know, that's so
And that's
crazy.
how I'm here now. When my three kids, they were young when I got divorced, but then once the youngest one, he is 20 now, he graduated from high school and went off to university. I graduated from momming and flew off to the other side of the world. And that's how I ended up in the east coast of Australia with an American accent.
Yeah, because I was like, what state are you in? And you're like, Australia. And I'm like, that is not a state.
It's not a state. I could tell you the state, but it's not going to make any sense to you.
Right. No, so
It's
are
super
you
fun.
like just a really weird off topic question, but like are your boys able to visit like a lot
Yeah.
and stuff like that? I love that.
Well, so I have three sons. My middle son is actually studying at the University of Wollongong. He came over here before me. Like
Wow.
so that's super cool. I mean,
Those stars aligned.
right? No kidding. Well, they had never been to Australia, and then I brought them over here, and he's having his own journey with his own birth father, where it's like, yeah, let's go to the other side of the world.
Mm,
What we were talking about. Sometimes limited contact is the healthiest thing ever.
sure is.
And then my youngest son is in San Diego at a university, and so he actually just as American universities sometimes do, they have semester abroad. He just had a semester abroad last semester in Australia, so that was super
No.
cool. But so the commitment I've made to myself, because parenting is one of my top values, is that I would see my sons at least once a year, which seems crazy to other people out there, but that's part of what I want to get into here, is that like we get to decide for ourselves what it means to be a good mom or to be a good daughter or to be a good sister or to be a good, and when I sat and I defined what it was to me, that I want to see them, my oldest son is now 27, youngest, I want to see them at least once a year. I want to touch base with them based on their needs. So one of my sons, we talk every 2 weeks. One of my sons, we talk every week. My other son, it's more like every couple of days based on their needs. And so, yes, I fly back to the United States, usually to the West Coast, because it's easier than flying to the East
Right.
Coast from Australia. And then I fly my son on the East Coast out to visit, because
I
even though
love
I
that.
used to be bankrupt in the basement, I have used resources and supported other women to help me, so that I now have resources to see my kids and live a life
It's
that I love.
just so insane. That is
Mhm.
something out of a movie.
It really is. There's like
Honestly.
so many parts of it that are like, wait a
I
minute.
know. Like, do you get like those general reactions when you're just like, because like you and I both been through some trauma and like we just talk
Hmm.
about it, like we're just like, oh my God, and then remember that one time? Like, and do
Yeah.
you get like the looks of people that are like basically what my face looked like, but
Yeah.
worse?
What I like for myself, I have a practice every month where I stop and I feel awe, because I
Mm-hmm.
literally was bankrupt in a basement, sobbing, didn't know where I was going to go. No one, my biological family had cut me out. Like I had
Mm-hmm.
friends were siding with, like it was, and here I am, making a living with my computer, my brain, married to a man in a marriage that I never had modeled for me, that is better than anything I've ever imagined. And so for me, it's more, I like to pause and be like, holy shit, girl, like
Yeah.
take a deep breath. Like this is possible. Like I don't know where your listener is right now in their lives, but
Mm-hmm.
wherever they are and however dark they're feeling, lives change with one little choice. Like my little choice to respond to that message, and then my little choice to get on WhatsApp and then like when he's like, well, do you want to come to Australia? I'm like, Sure. Like my friends,
Right.
meanwhile, were like, Susie, he's going to cut you up into tiny pieces and mail you home.
Literal.
And like little choices, and they're like, we have so many little pivot points during our days, during our weeks, during our months. And if we are brave enough and usually have the support of, a coach or a professional that can help us see where we want to go, we can change our lives. What we usually do with our brain programming is our brain likes to keep repeating what we've done before. We usually look to our past. We see that that's what's possible for us. We stay stuck in that. And we keep rinsing and repeating and living lives that feel pretty crappy inside, or feel crappy enough inside, and then we have to do other things so we don't feel that. So we overdrink, or we overshop, or we overgossip, or we overwork, and that's what I run a program called the Love Your Life School, where I'm really teaching people how to take tiny steps that feel comfortable to them so that they can live a life that feels better inside, regardless of what it looks like outside.
Yeah. I just like I'm recently divorced as well. And thankfully once they like got it, everyone adores my ex-husband. I still adore my ex-husband, but stories like that make me so grateful that I
Mm-hmm.
have the ex-husband that I do, which always sounds
Mm-hmm.
so weird to people, but I'm like, he could have absolutely screwed me over, but no, he's like, we made like agreement arrangement, like, we actually get along so much better not married than we did
Yeah, that
married.
can happen. That's beautiful. Right.
Like the second we went to actual roommates instead of being married and acting like roommates, like 90% of the issues went away. But like I also kind of dealt with, not to that extent, but I definitely dealt with like having to kind of like really like push the issue on why I was getting a divorce and stuff like that. But yeah, those little decisions like that, I would blew up my whole life
Mm-hmm.
so that I could maybe not be miserable day to day.
Mm-hmm.
And not that he necessarily made me miserable. We just were not compatible. And
Right.
like I
I
wasn't
mean,
meeting
yeah.
his needs and vice versa. But like, yeah, those little itty bitty changes like blow up my life.
Mm-hmm.
But it just works. But you feel like, how do I want to word? Oh my God. How were you able to kind of start undoing all of that? Like the expectations and just kind of looking back and seeing everything that you had been through. Like, how did you start undoing and unpacking and all of that?
Slowly, I guess.
Yeah.
And slowly, and I wouldn't have slowly, and I was just going to say I wouldn't have been able to do it as quickly if I hadn't been working with a coach. Like
Hmm.
I mean, our brains are hardwired, as I said before, to look to the past to create more of what we have for the future. And
Hmm.
so often in our thinking, we can think thoughts that keep us stuck in those patterns. Like even someone just listening to you, where you were saying, like, my ex and I now really get along. And like they might think thoughts that are like, well, that's not the ex I have. So that's never possible for me. So that thought right there, sometimes you need a coach to be like, okay, like that thought feels very true to them, where they're like, well, I don't have that ex, so I can't have what Susie and Heather are talking about. That's a
Right.
thought they are thinking. And that thought is leading them to create more of what they are in the future versus, and so it's not as easy as what I'm going to say here in the podcast, but like another thought that if I was working with someone, we might try to use some of my tools to get to believe is that you have the exact ex you're meant to have to become the woman you're going to become,
Hmm.
or you have because how much more empowering than like, oh, this is the ex and this is what I'm stuck in, versus
Right.
like, oh, this is the exact ex I have. Like, what am I going to learn from this? Okay, so I'm going to like this, let's see. And like, that's just like, that gives you just the energy in that gives you something else to do something with. And so for me, it really was, again, coupled with my friend dying and getting coaching and my own self exploration, I very much um, vacillated between feeling like, oh, woe is me, it's all happening to me, into a like, well, wait a minute, let me see how
Right.
maybe, like these things did happen. I'm not saying, yay, I'm so glad I grew up in this kind of household, or I'm so
Right.
glad my first husband was so damn controlling, but they did happen. How did they shape me? How am I responding in these reactions, in these interactions? And then how, like, if I want something different, I need to do something different moving forward. And so that's really where I started to look at that. Plus my background, I have a master's in education. And so I just geek out on studying human development and behavior and
Hmm.
understanding why we do what we do. And so looking at some of that, attachment theory and also just relationship models and how the codependent model is not healthy model, a thriving model. And when I say codependence, it's a term that's thrown around a lot, but just in case your listeners like, what the heck does that really mean?
Mm-hmm.
Codependent is you are dependent on someone else, like and it in a place where it sinks you almost into like both people in the relationship are not performing as well as they would be. And it is what it feels like in your body is like if the other person that you're in this codependent relationship with, say it's your mom or say it's your sibling or say it's your friend or your spouse, if they're having a feeling, it feels very much like it's your feeling and your problem to solve. Like codependency is an over feeling of someone else's, it's over responsibility for someone else's feelings or life circumstance. So, someone else is struggling, your friend is struggling, and then all of a sudden we're thinking about it and two at night in the middle of the night. Or, our brother tells us that his cat is sick and then we're Googling his cat's sickness and like we're taking like we're using our brain to solve what their brain should be doing. Whereas empathy is just feeling compassion for the other person. Codependency is this overfeeling of the other person. And that in itself is a very unhealthy model that both collapse into. Both people are not able to mature and grow into their best emotional self. Whereas the opposite is not sometimes people think the opposite is like this, like I can do it all by myself. I'm good. I'm like an ice queen, like hyper independent. But that's
Mm-hmm.
like swinging the whole other way. And really what we're looking for in healthy relationships is interdependence, where we have the courage and the adult skills to speak up for ourselves, to say the needs that we have. We take responsibility for our feelings and our experiences. We don't blame them on someone else. And if we want help, say our cat is sick and we're just overwhelmed, then we freaking ask for it. We don't expect the other person to do it for us. We might say, like, I'm really overwhelmed. Is there any way you could Google cat illnesses or something?
Right.
Because otherwise the codependent relationship sets up a dynamic of over functioning, someone who's like overdoing, over taking care of, overthinking. You're like it's like you're being the therapist for them. So they never need to get a freaking therapist. And it's this over functioning. And then the other person goes into an under functioning, almost like learned helplessness, where they're just like, I'm so lonely. What do I do? And you're like, and it can really be, it's just unhealthy for both people. Breeds a lot of resentment for the person who's taking care of all the other, resentment. And then almost like a backslap of like guilt and shame, like, oh, I should be, and for the other person, they can feel a little like victim-y entitled, like, oh, why isn't she answering my call right now? And why isn't she? And it's just like unhealthy. So to answer your question,
I'm loving this.
Right. So you're like, what question was that? How did I get here? I became clear in my own tendencies and how my background with that as normal, like that was sort of what was normal for me, is not healthy. Normal doesn't mean it's good for us. And so I started to notice and then do the practices to sort of break my nervous system out of that. And then also my brain out of those thinking patterns.
For sure. I feel like there's such a fine line between empathy and codependency that it is so easy to slide into that territory. Which, do you think that the codependency that you experienced was as high as it was because of the fact that you were an eldest daughter?
I'm not sure. No, I don't actually. I think like our whole model, it's almost like
Mm-hmm.
the system is broken. Like our whole model was taught that like you're responsible for dad's feelings, you're responsible for mom's feelings. So that would have been something that all of my siblings, me and my two sisters also got. We just would react to it differently. Like I heard Dr. Gabor Mate say, trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you. So it's like how we as little beings, or me in my first marriage, register what's happening in me and then how I react to that. So I think the difference in empathy and codependency is in it, how it feels in your body. So empathy feels like it feels it feels light. It's like, I mean, sometimes like say, you hear that your sibling is struggling with something, like you can feel sad and you can feel sorry and you're like, oh God, that sucks that he's going through that or whatever. But codependency feels heavy. It literally feels like a weighted blanket of responsibility. Like them telling, it can feel heavy. It can also, for me, I can feel anxious when I feel it, like when I get caught in this pattern, because I don't believe I'm going to recover from codependency. I believe I am recovering. Like it's in my deep neural pathways of my brain. But when I say I get a text from a son that is just like, I didn't get the job and I'm so upset. If I'm feeling codependent, it might feel like a quickening, like a fluttering, like, oh my God, I need to do something. I need to fix this. I need to like a sort of urgent, crazy energy.
Mm-hmm.
And other times it can feel like a deep responsibility and heaviness. So there's a feeling state that's different. In terms of how how me as an older sibling reacted, because I know you wanted to talk about siblings.
Yeah, it's just
when I was young, when I was in that house, I'm not sure codependency affected me more. I think where I see codependency affecting older children is societally. Sometimes we say like, well, you're, like the responsibility falls on that oldest kid, which is so archaic. But it is, first of all, the whole model that it's your responsibility to take care of your parent is off. That is wrong. That is not something like that is supported by Reese. That is not a healthy, thriving model. A parent-child relationship is different than any other relationship out there, and that it is always top down. The parent is responsible for the child. The child is not responsible for the parent. We get that so wrong. We have so many parents walking around out there being like, I'm lonely. Why aren't you calling? Putting their not being the adult in the relationship, expecting their child to be the adult in the relationship to meet their needs, where it's not the kid's job to meet their parents' needs. It is the parent's job to meet the parent's need. And I don't care how old you are. That doesn't go away if your mom is 80, because the nature of how we were brought into this world, there is something in our brain that is always seeking for that love and approval of a parent. And it is different. We can be friends with them. We can go out with them in certain ways. But when that parent is looking for the kid to meet their needs, that parent's brain is capable of, that is a dysfunctional relationship. And so that is the older sibling I sometimes see coming in, because then we add that guilt and that shame. And then we do the things. We do drive them to their doctor's appointments, or we do send them the article on how they should be eating this for their heart health or whatever. And then what happens? They don't do it. And then what do we feel? Resentful and pissed. And that's the dynamic I'm talking about with overfunctioning and that learned helplessness. So it really can be a burden. And I just say, like, we all have the choices. I just opt out of that. I'm like, right. Like I get to choose, like, what do I want to do? Like me as a person with my values and what I'm here for. Do I want to call my mom on, and how often do I want to call? Like, what do I think a loving daughter does? Well, I think calling every Wednesday makes sense. She thinks differently. She thinks a loving daughter should answer her text every time she texts. She thinks a loving daughter should call 4 times a week. Well, we have different little instruction books. Okay. She has this, that, and I'm like, go at it, mom. But that's where, we get into a lot of trouble. The instruction books we have for other people, the instruction books we need to have are the ones we have for ourselves. What does it mean to me to be a good daughter? What does it mean to me to be a good sibling? And trying to really, like, the older we get, put blinders on with what society is telling us, because most of what society is telling us is sort of that, like, quote unquote normal, what we've been taught. But if you look at freaking society, our anxiety rates are going through the roof. We're having more and more people not launching from houses, like more kids. And it's like, are you kidding me? So let's not accept normal as okay. I like saying, let's not be ordinary. Let's be extraordinary. We don't want ordinary.
No, and
ordinary doesn't feel good.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm
like
33 years old.
Medicines to deal with ordinary.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm 33 years old, and my dad still, like, at least weekly, I get a text. How's your week?
Yeah.
How's your week? And like, he's not really a texter, so I'll be like, good. And then he just sends like a heart emoji. But then like, if it's been a couple of weeks and I haven't called him, he's calling me and he's like, you good? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm just, life happened and I have ADHD. So I thought it's been 3 days and it's been 3 weeks. My bad. But like,
but yeah, it sounds just like for him, he might have the manual, like a good dad, like checks in with his daughter once a week. And that's like, and so then it's your job not to take responsibility. It's like, okay, this is what dad does. Like, you good? And you're just like, yeah. And he sends you the heart emoji, and then dad feels good because he's being a good dad. And then when he says, like, if he hasn't reached out, that's on him. Like, he hasn't reached out to you for 3 weeks. It's not you, like, you're living your life. You're trying your best over here. And
Right.
so then you might have a thing where you're like, oh, I reach out to my dad. Like, if it's been 3 weeks, I'm going to reach out to him. But a lot of what we can do to get out of codependency is in our own heads, to just stop, bringing that on. But it is challenging, and it's nice to be around other people, like, just, for your listeners, to seek out people who are doing things differently, because if we are around people who this is the model, and we're with someone and they say the thing, they're like, oh, you haven't called your mom, or like, oh, you didn't do this, or that just ignites all those old patterns within us.
Exactly. And like my sister and I joke because like when my dad does do his phone calls, if one of us doesn't pick up, the other one's getting a phone call. So we just call it like the dad tour. So if I don't pick up, like I'll be with her. And if I like miss call and I'm like, your phone's about to go off. And then he's like, what's going on? And then we're just
He
like,
needs
so
he needs like a dad fix. Yeah.
yeah, he's like, you guys good? Like, what's going on? Like, what's new? And, I think my sister and I are both at the point in our lives where we're like, not shit. Like, nothing's going on. Just like work and this. And, it's not that I feel bad that I don't have anything new to update, but I'm just like, you made the effort and things are exactly the same they were 2 weeks ago. But it's nice to see, especially because my dad and I, like, our dynamic was not great. Like, for the record, I realize, like, I personally had a fantastic divorce, but I'm gonna tell you right now, my parents' divorce was not. There were cops and restraining orders involved, so I do get super hostile exes. Like, I have been there, I have lived that. So it's not just me being like, oh my God, divorce is so easy because like my ex-husband was great. Like, I've been there. Yeah. My dad and I have come a very long way because he did a lot of growing and a lot of maturing, and like at the core, he'll still always be the same person, but we're also at a point where if I can tell that certain like traits are coming back, I'm like, hey, you good? Because like I'm noticing XYZ. And then he's like, thank you for pointing that out. And then we have a conversation about it. Like, it's just so much, it's more of an actual like adult child and parent dynamic where we can actually have conversations versus like him speaking at me, because our dynamic is also very different because I'm an adult. I'm not a kid he has to raise anymore. It's more of a like advice and check-in role, if that makes any sense.
It does completely. And that's sort of what I was talking about like we have, if you will, like 3 options for relationships: codependent, independent, and interdependent. And the independent would just be like, yeah, I don't need you, dad, screw you. Like, I'm off. The interdependent is what I hear you guys growing towards is a like, what does he want and need? Will he ask for that? Like, he'll call you or he'll text you or whatever. And then what do you want? And what do you, when you talking to him, it's like, I don't really feel the need to share right now. Or like, what might feel good to me is something that we as kids don't really investigate much. Like, why might I want to talk to my dad? If we're thinking like, oh, I need to talk to my dad because it helps him and he needs to, like, he feels, or this is what kids do, that's more in the codependent model. But if we're like, all right, here's this dude, like, that happens to be my biological father, like, what might feel good to me in talking to, like, what might I want to share if I'm moving more towards that relationship? What's enjoyable to me? What's not enjoyable to me? And really investigating that from our own perspective and trying to get out of, because as kids, we're always tapped into what dad wants, what mom wants, to stay safe. We needed to be safe as kids. So emotionally safe and physically safe. And now as we're older, we just are needing to reprogram our nervous system that it's like, no, you're safe. And so what might you want? Do you want to talk to your dad? Do you want to, might it feel nice to share with him? Or do you want his advice? No, Dad, I don't want your advice on this. Thanks. I just wanted to tell you about it, or whatever. It's just I just like, opening up the opportunity for people to have it coming from them when they're the kids. It's not your responsibility to meet your parents' needs.
Totally agree. When you started working through what you had to work through, was part of that healing process kind of like, did that affect like you as a mom like later in life, especially because like you were undoing a lot of these old habits that you knew weren't great to begin with, but kind of were falling in line per se in the beginning? How did your healing process affect you as a parent later on?
Yeah. I would say, I mean, it definitely, like, everything is related.
Right.
One of the things that I am really happy about, thank you, universe, is that I had this background in, I had my master's of education. I had been a high school teacher. I had always, from the day my son was born, I was always like really learning and open to how to parent. I was aware that the way that I had been parented was not what I wanted to. So I was sort of coming to it with a beginner's mind, which is not what most people have. Like, most people are like, we're just going to either do exactly what was done to us or the exact opposite. They're not sort of in it. So I really, one of my most popular programs is I run, it's a parenting, like all online, where it's a parenting course, how to raise and resilient kids, because it's really quite simple. But if we don't know these things, again, this is like, we weren't taught this in school. And if we're not aware of what our job is, if we're not aware of what our kids' job is, then we create a lot of drama in our house. So I am very happy to say that I had that background, and it actually was that point of conflict that I was so confident in, what was good for my kids and their well-being and their mental health. And I was in such a contrast with my ex that I find that's what finally got me to say I want a divorce. I did not have the confidence in myself that my happiness and my needs were important. It was more that I was like, oh, hell no. We are not, like, I am not having you parent these kids this way, which
Hmm.
that was helpful. As I have gotten older, I'm having experiences that I haven't had, the empty nest and having them go off. And so it's a continual learning process for me to stay to stay out of feeling responsible for them. These are three little things that I love more than anything else in the world. And there's a special attachment. Like, they were dependent on me, as like human beings are some of the most helpless, species when we're first born. Like, they cannot survive without a mom. So it is that, without another adult, like, you leave a baby on the floor, they're going to die. So you need some
Hmm.
other adult in there. And so there really is that codependent at first, for the first 10 years, really, where you really are like, you are responsible to make sure they take their freaking baths and to make sure they, do. And then
Hmm.
working our way out of that. One of the things I like thinking of as a parent that helps a lot of, if anyone is a parent of anyone here, really our job, I like thinking of the medical model that from 10 and under, it's our brains. Our brains are on, you don't want to hold my hand when we cross the street. Well, that's too bad. We're holding my hand, my adult
Right.
brain, like, it's my brain doing 100% of the work. Between 10 and 25, the kid is between that age. What they're trying to do is learn who they are, what they like, what their needs are. And so it's a brain share. So maybe at like 11 and 12, it's 90% mom's and dad's brain and 10% kids' brain. By the time they're 20, 21, we want it to be, kids' brain 90% of the time. And then 25 and older, it's like they're off, they're going, that this is
Right.
their life to live. And so a lot of what I'm aware of as a mom now that my sons are all in their 20s is that, my job is to love and support them.
Hmm.
And that's it. Like, it is not to think they should be doing things a certain way, or that they should, it is just like to listen to what they think they should be doing. I don't know. They're here, they are having their own journey, they're having their own experience, and then I get to love and support them. And that is different than what is modeled out there. I think we like to say that, but I think my job mostly is to stay out of fear. And then, when in terms of the divorce, how that influenced me, it really was to try to stay out of my, like, big sister, older sibling, firstborn, thinking my way was the right way, because I could get a lot in my head in fear that they were still, because the way my custody went, that they were 50 with
Hmm.
me and 50 with their dad. I could have gotten a lot in my head with what was out of my control, with what kind of parenting was happening in their house with their dad. And that would have been really unhelpful for me. And I know myself, I would have gotten really weird when they were with me. I would have been like almost trying to like overparent,
Right.
or like speak negatively about him in a way that's not helpful for them, because that's their dad. That's the only dad they have. Like,
Hmm.
and so that is where I think I brought a lot of my self-awareness.
Right. Now, about your coaching, because yeah, you're lighting right up. I know you love what you do. You were saying earlier off camera that a lot of your clients are women over 40. Are you finding that a lot of that trend is they're either done like hardcore raising kids, or they're like towards the end of that and they're starting to kind of rediscover who they are as people?
So I'm so glad that you just reflected back to me what I said, because I think who I work with are people who are they are waking up to the life they're living is not creating an internal experience that they want. So it actually isn't a chronological age. It is more a emotional age and almost like a spiritual age of
Mm-hmm.
like, wait a minute, like I see that some of my patterns from my past are affecting my present and my future more than I want them to be, and so I want some, because I have clients in their 20s, they're just way more emotionally mature than I was in my 20s. So
Same.
for
I'm
sure.
like, damn, good for them.
Right. So I have people who are single, I have people who have kids, I have people who don't have kids, but a lot of really what's influencing us is our society, not to get too political here, but it's not political. A patriarchal society, the definition of patriarchy, and patriarchy does not help women or men. I'm a mom of boys. I am a big male lover. But the
Mm-hmm.
definition of patriarchy is that a woman is here to serve and meet the male's needs. And so we have that in our blood, no matter our age, that, and I see that showing up, comes more to a head if you're a mom. So that's where, I draw a lot of, because they really are there to meet their kids' needs. And then as their kids are growing, if the mom is not doing what I was speaking about, that sort of shifting out of her brain doing all the work into letting her kid do all the work, her kid is going to be more anxious, less confident, less resilient. She's going to feel more fear, more overfunctioning. And it just gets to be a crazy cycle. So the sooner I can get the mom, the better. Like, be freaking great if, like the kid is 8 and I get him in my office, because it is it doesn't matter where the listener is. We can do things at any point. It's never too late. Like, our whole life we're learning about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a lot of struggle and challenge when there's so much responsibility put on, the kids. It's like it's an extension of the parent. And whether your kid is on the baseball team, or whether the kid is turning in the homework, or whether it's like almost like you didn't make the baseball team, or you're not turning in the homework, versus like empathy, like, oh, it sucks they didn't make the team. You really wanted, that sort of piece. So I with my coaching, I like helping people learn how to live lives that they love, and lives that we love don't feel good all the time. Like I always say, I don't actually want my kids to be happy all the time, because my kids being happy, they'd be downstairs playing video games, eating Cheetos. Like, that's them happy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that them living their highest and most fulfilled version of themselves? No. So, we need the both, and we need the short-term discomfort for the long-term gain. And I like the biggest feedback I get is that people feel better after they meet with me. So that's what I like to help people with, is to I make things simple. Like, they bring me their problem, I help simplify it out, and then we get little action steps they can practice. And people, you and I are talking about how we blew up our lives, but what the reality is I usually see people like completely changing their lives without changing their lives. Like, they might, like, it's the coolest thing. Like, they might still, like 3 years from now, still, be in a marriage and be with the family and be with but like, they're like, I just don't get it. Like, if you like, we're a video camera, it looks the same, but it feels different. And it's amazing. And it works every day. And I love.
What's been the biggest surprise? And I ask this of a lot of the coaches that I have on, but what was the biggest surprise for you when you started all of this? Like, what was kind of that curveball that you were like, oh, I didn't think about that one?
What has surprised me? I think what surprises me is that not everyone has a coach. Like so many people think they can do it alone. Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
given this human brain. We don't have any instruction manual. We can't see it. Like, we don't, like, we go to the doctor for all these other things. And
Right.
like, what we're thinking and feeling impacts us more than anything. Like, it's amazing. Like, I look at, like, think of like a stadium, like people watching like baseball or something. Pretty much like most people in there are going to have a dentist. Like,
Right.
most people in there are not. going to have a coach. And it's like fascinating to me where it's like, it can make it so much easier. Like we're here, like I guess that's what's surprising is how much pain and suffering people put up with that they don't need to put up with. And it just aches my soul and gets me out of bed in the morning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can imagine. What a kind of a random question, but what do your boys think about what you're doing?
I'd have to ask them. I think they, I don't know what they feel about I think, and they're incredibly supportive.
I love that.
Yeah, I think they're thrilled to not see me bankrupt in a basement anymore. I like to think that I show them a vision of what's possible, that anything is frigging possible. Like they heard not only their dad, but their grandpas and their grandmas telling them that their mom was crazy, that she needs to go get a job at Starbucks. She's not going to do this. She's not. And now they see me on my podcast is top 1% globally ranked.
Damn.
I am the breadwinner in my family. I am, I love, and for me, that's super important to show my boys that no matter what the hell they want, they can go after and get it. It's going to seem that the more impossible it seems, the more likely it is. So I am thrilled and pleased to raise boys that hopefully feel permission to go after their dreams and live lives that they want, whatever that looks like for them, that they have a mom that supports and loves them as they are.
I love that so much. I love that.
Yeah.
Just to kind of wrap, if there's somebody listening, which I can guarantee you there's at least one person that's listening to this that this is a hit like a ton of bricks. What would be your one piece of advice to start all of this? Like obviously get a coach, but what would be your one piece of advice?
To start thinking that this is happening at the exact right time for you, that you're not behind, is really important, that this is happening exactly how it's supposed to be. And then the first step would be to go Google Susie Pettit and the Love Your Life show and download 5 episodes that look interesting to you.
Mm-hmm.
And start there. I actually have a podcast roadmap that brings them through the foundations of emotional intelligence and sort of the backbone, which is just at my website, smbwell.com/roadmap, all one word. That's because you just want different voices in your head.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're listening and they get this little glimmer, like what we're prone to do is then we just go on to the next podcast or we go on to the next Instagram post or and it's like, stop, get that friggin' roadmap and just see where that leads you. Because it is these little pivot points and these little changes that will change your life, make you feel better.
I love that. And you answered like my very last question of where can we find you? So
yeah.
It's just, you're making my job so easy over here.
So great. Yeah. I think I am like the listener's biggest supporter. It is possible. If you think it's possible, you have that thought in your head because it is possible. The only thing that gets in our way is our thoughts and our limiting beliefs. So like we get these ideas. We are unique and we have unique desires, and it's like, go after it. You've got it. I'm just such a cheerleader for people.
I love that. Well, Susie, thank you so much for coming on. This was amazing. I love it. So yeah, you guys can catch Susie Pettit on her website. I will be linking everything below. You can find some clips on Instagram, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, thank you, Susie, so much.
Thank you, Heather.